Do you want to relive your emo phase as an adult? Do you want to walk up to your crush and say, hey, you, I don't like your girlfriend, and they'll be like, you know what? Same, and fall in love with you? Do you want Steve Rogers to gaze lovingly into your eyes with all of the homoerotic subtext that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has to offer? Well, hoo boy, do I have the video for you today. Hey y'all, it's me, Alex. Today I have a tutorial, very in-depth. I would dare to say that this is the tutorial on how to do a matte black smoky eye. Now, this was actually probably one of the first videos that I posted to YouTube when I started my channel about 5.5 years ago. And obviously, the camera quality and my makeup skills weren't quite as good as they are now, so I have some new techniques and some improvements that I've made upon, you know, that technique, that look that I've done. For me personally, this is the look that I go for when I don't know what else to do with my makeup and I want to just feel like a badass. I just wanted to show y'all how I do this look because I feel like matte black eyeshadow can be very intimidating for people, and I recognize that a lot of people who want to try it probably don't want to go as intensely as this. But I love this look. I think that it looks really cool, really badass, and I like to think that I am pretty good at it. So that's what I'm going to show y'all today. Before we get into the tutorial part, I do want to show y'all some of my favorite shadows that I use and have used over the years to do this sort of look. That way, if you already have one of these palettes like in your collection already, you can be like, oh, okay, I can use that. If you're looking for a palette to do something like this look with, you can go out and purchase one of those. Some of these are limited edition, so yeah. But I'm going to show y'all some of the palettes and the shadows that I really like to do this sort of look with. I like some of them more for their pigmentation and some of them for more of their user friendliness, because sometimes, especially depending on your skill level in terms of eyeshadow, those don't necessarily go hand in hand. I personally really love just like big pigmented shadows, and I find that for me, it's easier to just like get a lot of pigmentation and then blend it out, but I also recognize that that's not the way that everyone does their makeup, so I wanted to make some recommendations for those as well. Let me show you some of my favorite shadows to do this sort of look with. Okay, so firstly, let's start off on what I actually use to do this look, and that is the Lime Crime Venus 2 palette. Now, I feel like a lot of people don't really talk about Lime Crime and their shadows a whole lot. I think their liquid lipsticks are kind of like everyone's big thing, which, to be fair, sure. And I think they do some very cute color stories, but their shadow quality, at least in this palette, I haven't tried any of their other palettes, the shadow quality in this is very good. And obviously, you can get a lot of other looks other than this sort of look, but this is really good in terms of both pigmentation and user friendliness. I think that this is a good balance of like the best of both worlds in that, whereas some of the other palettes, there goes that Power Ranger on a motorcycle outside once again. I am filming. But I think that if you want a good balance between pigmentation and blendability, this is a really good choice. So I used Mud, Boot, and Fly in order to create this look. Obviously, Boot is the star of the show here. That is a matte black with a bit of purple micro glitter. Now, obviously, you can see on my eye that the purple micro glitter doesn't really show up when you apply it. To me, it doesn't have any real purpose aside from like being decorative in the palette, so don't get this palette expecting that you're going to have some purple micro glitter all over your lid. I don't feel like that doesn't do it. I'm kind of sad that the purple micro glitter doesn't show up because it is objectively really cool, but once again, it doesn't have any real purpose in this palette other than decorativeness. But I feel like these shadows are really nice and pigmented, but also blend really well with each other. So this is my first pick if you want a good balance and kind of a good overall sense of pigmentation and blendability in a shadow. Another palette that I love for user friendliness is the Drench Cosmetics Cosmic Oasis palette. Now this one doesn't really have like a burgundy transition shade in it, but it does have this very, very beautiful matte black. I really love Drench's eyeshadow formula. I have this and their Jupiter Jungle palette. I am tentatively including the Jupiter Jungle palette in terms of like good matte blacks as well, but I haven't had as much time to play with that as I have with this one. So it's good, and I think that the quality is the same, but since I haven't tried it as much, I'm going to say that this one has a very good matte black. Both of them are available on the Drench Cosmetics website. Now this one only kind of has a matte black. You can use the red to kind of blend it out. I think that that looks really cool. This is what it looks like swatched, you know? And I think it could look really cool if you use like the red to kind of blend it out. I have done that as a look in the past and I think it looks really cool. Obviously that would be a bit more bright and a bit more dramatic than the look that I am doing today, but this is absolutely fantastic for it. And it does come with another red eyeshadow, but mine fell out and is lost to the void at the moment. Now this palette was limited edition and I'm not sure if you can get it anymore, but that is the Waiting Room palette from the Melt and Beetlejuice collection. Obviously this has sort of the same vibes as what I'm wearing on my eyes today, just a little bit more expanded. So if you don't have the Venus 2 or you don't want to get the Venus 2, but you like just sort of like the burgundy and black color scheme, then this is also a really good choice. I like that there is a lot of mattes in here. Charman is just a beautiful, beautiful pigmented matte black, but this is probably one of the blackest blacks that I have. Now Melt Shadows to me are a little bit more on the pigmented and a little less on the blendable side. So if you go for this, you will get like a really nice, to me personally, really flattering sort of matte black, because I feel like the blacker the black, the better it looks on brown eyes. I don't know about much others because obviously I only have brown eyes. I've only ever had brown eyes. But you do sacrifice a little bit of blendability with Melt's formula. Personally, as I've said before, I would rather have pigmentation than blendability because I can kind of make it work. It just means I have to spend a couple extra minutes on my eyes in the morning. But I personally think that this is a good choice if you want just like a very, very pigmented sort of matte black smoky eye. Okay, another one that I feel like, to look at this palette, you wouldn't think to do an eye look like this with it, but it's one that I've done a lot, and this is probably actually the first palette that I've had that I really like to do this look with, and that's the Balm's Nude Tude palette. This palette has one of my favorite matte blacks of all time in it, as you can see. That one is obviously beat up a lot more, and like the other shadows are like fine. And I really wish that the Balm would come out with more color schemes that are more up my alley, because I think that their shadow quality is really nice. It's very pigmented, but also like nice and creamy. Like, not to be that kind of influencer, but like they're really creamy and it's really nice. So the shade in here is called Sirius. I've had this for so long and it is still just like beautiful and soft to the touch. And that is what that looks like. You can kind of see that that one is even darker than the one from the Waiting Room palette. I think all of these shadows obviously work well in their own different ways. But this one, I'm like 90% certain that this hasn't been discontinued. Like, this is probably one of my oldest palettes in the collection. But the matte black in there is fantastic. You can, I feel like, you know, there's not a lot of matte blacks that you can necessarily use on your own. I generally recommend using like a burgundy or something to kind of transition it. But if you're going to try and just do all matte black and just blend it out on its own, I would say that Sirius from this palette is probably the best shade to do that with. Simply because it is so creamy, it is so pigmented, it is so blendable that if you do, you know, get a whole bunch of brushes that you can use to really blend this out on its own without a transition shade, this one would probably be your best bet to do that with. Okay, I have two more palettes. This one is the Strobe Cosmetics, now Shroud Cosmetics Creepy Cute palette. This one, the magnet on this one is difficult. Honestly, this one has stuck around in my collection for a long time. Not really because I'm a pastel person, as y'all know, pastels aren't really for me. It doesn't look that great on me. But the matte black in here, void. Oh, I really love Shroud's matte formula. Their shimmer formula is also fantastic. All of their formulas are really, really great. But void in here is a really fantastic matte black. This one is probably, each one that I swatch, I'm like, this is the blackest black I own. This is the blackest black I own. This one is a bit drier as opposed to being very creamy. So if you like a shadow that's a little bit drier but still is really, really pigmented, this one would be a good choice for you. I also think that Shroud sells these as singles, if I'm not mistaken. So if you don't want to, you know, get a whole bunch of pastels, or if you like this one and like one other shade in the palette, you can get it as a single. Obviously, I know that they're closed down right now to work on the pre-orders that they're going through right now, but once they open up and you want a good matte black shade from an indie brand, go for Void! Go for Void, it's great. And then finally, from one of the last two good palettes that Anastasia Beverly Hills did, the Alyssa Edwards palette. Now, in general, I feel like this palette is not for the beginner or for the faint of heart, simply because everything is so pigmented. Personally, I find that the shadows are really fun to work with, but I feel like if you know, are kind of just learning how to do eyeshadow, this really isn't the palette for you. Also because like half of these shades will like stain the heck out of your eyes, so that's like a thing. But the shade Beast in here is also just absolutely fantastic for a matte black smoky eye. Before, you know, all of ABH went to shit, I really enjoy their eyeshadow formula. It's one of my favorite mainstream eyeshadow formulas. And I feel like if you like the big pigmented mattes that ABH makes, this is very well, this is so good. So this is Beast, and this one doesn't swatch quite as well, but when you apply it to the eyes, it does really build up well. I'll swatch it over top of itself because I feel like sometimes when you use a matte black shadow, it can kind of like fade out to gray, whereas this one, when you have it over a good primer, like my preference for the NYX HD Eyeshadow Primer, it'll really build up to like this exact shade, and it can be very pigmented. It's just very nice. So those are my favorite matte black shadows that I like to use for these sorts of looks. I haven't really used a whole lot of matte black singles, so I don't really have anything to recommend there. I have tried one from Divina, and it works well, it blends nicely, but when you apply it, it's not quite as black as some of the other matte blacks that I've used. So if you're not concerned about it being like super black and dark and smoky, I think you can get that one. It is nice. It does perform well. I don't have any issues blending their shadows. But personally, when it comes to a deep black shade, like a nice midnight black, I would choose any of these over those. So those are my favorite shadows to use. As an honorable mention, you'll see me use this in the tutorial. I really like using a black liner along the lower waterline to kind of help finish off the look, just because I feel like that adds an extra, you know, hot topic level to the look. I know that, you know, I have gigantic sugar glider eyes, so I can use like a dark waterline shade. I know that if you have smaller eyes, a lot of people don't like doing that as much, which is completely fair. Eyes of a sugar glider. Eyes of a literal fucking Hamtaro. So I like using the Melt Ultra Matte Gel Liner in Onyx. Obviously this is a black eyeliner. You'll see how I kind of apply it, but I just use a flat smudgy brush to just really get in there, and I find that just adds something extra lovely to the look. Those are all my favorite products that I have used to make this look over the years. I hope that was helpful. Now let's get y'all into the tutorial for this look. Okay, so as with any eyeshadow look, you're going to want to prime your eyes. I mention this primer in every single video that I do. It is the NYX HD Eyeshadow Primer. I personally really like this one for a wide variety of looks, but especially this sort of look, because it just provides a very nice and smooth base that like helps control the oil on your lids but not make it so matte that things are impossible to blend. I also don't set down my primer because I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose of actually getting the eyeshadow to stick to your eyes. So I am just applying that down. Obviously, since we are focusing on just like matte shades for this look, aside from the inner corner highlight, we're really, you know, not going to use a glitter primer or anything like that. I'm also going to take this, you know, just whatever's left on my finger along the lower lash line and kind of onto my under eye bags, since, you know, this is going to be very blown out and very smoky. That way, you know, everything can kind of just stay as primed and last as long as possible. Okay, so first I'm actually going to begin with the transition shade, and this look is going to involve basically going a lot back and forth between the transition shade and the matte black on the lid. So for the transition shade, I always like to start it off with a very big fluffy brush. These are two of my favorites. Both of these sadly were discontinued. They were both limited edition, but I think that's the problem with all of the brushes that I really like, is that all of them end up being discontinued. But this sort of shape of a brush, obviously this one is a little frayed. I'm gonna have to pluck those out later. But this is the Crease Brush from the Melt and Beetlejuice collection, and this is the Elf and Jake Hissa J3 brush from their collaboration last summer. Anything that is very kind of like big and fluffy and kind of tapered towards the top, I think is just generally a great brush for any sort of like grungy look. Now obviously this only really works for my eye shape. I would imagine that if your eyes are a bit more hooded, you might want to go for a bit of a smaller brush, but personally this is what I go for. So I'm going to use the Melt one just because I think that it's slightly bigger, slightly denser, slightly fluffier. And then the palette I'm going to use for this look is the Lime Crime Venus 2. I don't know why, this is the one that kind of inspires me the most out of all of the ones that I kind of mentioned towards the beginning. Or at least it's the one that I feel like is one of the more user-friendly ones to go with. So for the transition shade, I like to use sort of a burgundy shade. Yeah, just like a matte dark burgundy. I feel like, you know, even though most folks for my skin tone would go for something lighter, I have never really paid attention to that. I don't really buy into the light transition shade for most eye looks. So instead, I'm going to use this lovely shade Mud, and I'm basically just going to stick the very, very tip of that brush into the shadow, and I'm just blending that into my crease. And obviously this is very, very pigmented. Even though this is super, super pigmented, if you hold the brush kind of just towards the tip here as opposed to holding it up really, really close there. If you hold it up really close, yeah, it'll be precise, but it's more difficult to blend. But if you hold it up to the tip, then that is going to get you a bit more of an even distribution of the color, and it's just going to make it a lot easier to blend in my experience. Basically, the closer up to the brush itself that you go, the more precise it's going to be, and the further back you go, the wider distribution it'll be, but it'll be easier to blend. And since I tend to be really rough with my shadows and just like really dig into them, I find that if I just have my fingers up here and hold it up there, then all the pigmentation that I get is a lot easier to blend. And I also like just kind of blending that out slightly on the outer corner just to match everything up. I like to put it up pretty far, not quite to my brow bone, but I feel like that's close enough. I feel like this makes a really good shape where obviously you still have the lid kind of open for the black shade, but obviously the color got very, very dense in the crease. So when you apply the black shade, that's going to be a lot easier to blend from my experience. So now we're basically going to move on to the black shade just to get that all packed on. I personally really like the Elf and Jake Hissa J1 brush, which is obviously a flat brush, as you can see, but it also like is a little bit thicker than some of the other flat brushes, and it's not quite as precise on the top. You can use a very like flat precise brush to do this, that works fine. But personally, since this isn't like a cut crease or anything like that, I don't feel like you need to do that. Obviously, for the black shade, which is the star of the show, the star of this look, the star of this video, we are going to use Boot from the Venus 2. And this is a matte black with a little bit like a purple shimmer, purple micro glitter in it. And it can show up. I don't feel like it shows up the most, but I do find, you know, it does kind of help it blend a little bit better. And this is a very, very lovely black. I am just packing that onto the brush. I also forgot to mention, don't do your foundation before you do this look, just because it can get a little messy since we are going a bit grungy. I never do my face before I do my eyes. I always do my eyes first, just in case like shit goes sideways. But yeah, I should have mentioned that sooner. But I'm just packing this on, and you can see already where the burgundy transition shade that we used, you can already see where that's just really meeting already. So while we are going to, you know, do some more blending as we're adding the pigmentation on, you can kind of see that because of the burgundy transition shade, it's kind of helping to blend things out already without necessarily having to blend it. And I try and pack on the shade instead of swiping it on. That way it goes on a bit less patchy, and yeah, you can get a whole bunch of pigmentation kind of in one spot as opposed to like windshield wiper swiping it all over the lid, because this isn't our transition shade, we're not blending yet. So our main focus is to get all of the pigmentation on as possible. And I kind of try and swipe it as close to my lash line as possible. This is where it can obviously get a little bit messy, but that's why I don't do my foundation first. And lucky for us, we're also going to be doing a very similar thing to the lower lash line. So I'm going to kind of go like this a little bit just to kind of lay down about the line where we're going to blend the black into the burgundy. But we're gonna take a different brush to blend that when the time comes. Okay, so now that all of the color is packed on as much as I want it to be, I am going to use this brush from a BH Cosmetics brush set that, like every other brush I've loved in this world, has been discontinued. Love that for me. But I'm going to very lightly dip it into Boot. Just the very, very tip of it. And that is what I'm going to use to just simply blend those two shades together. And it kind of already got a little bit blended, obviously, when we had originally done it. But since I want to take the black shade up as much as possible, you know, I want the black to be the focus of this look. You know, I'm just going to do that and make it as blended. And then I'm just going to go back in with a teeny weeny bit more mud on that Beetlejuice brush and just kind of tap it all around the edges. Just make it as big as possible. And if you're concerned about this going too high up onto the brow bone, that's fair. You can take just like whatever you would normally use as your brow bone highlight. So obviously for me, that would be just like a matte cream shade, and just take a brush and kind of clean it up that way. Personally, I haven't been highlighting my brow bone quite as much as I used to. Don't know why, kind of just haven't felt it. But yeah, if you're worried about this being a little bit too much, you can always clean it up with a brow bone highlight of your choosing. Okay, so now we're going to begin our work on the lower lash line. And basically what I do for this sort of look, it's kind of how I work a lot of my looks, where I try and do kind of what's happening in the crease along the lower lash line. That way it feels very uniform. I like using a brush kind of like this, the Elfin J Kissa J2 brush, where it is kind of flat from the side, but kind of tapers out into this fluffy part. I really like that because for my eye shape, that kind of helps to blow it out and make it super smoky while also not getting the shadow like all the way down here. Personally, I like to have a pretty big and fluffy lower lash line on most of my looks. It just makes me really happy because, you know, then I don't have to wear concealer for my under eye bags when I'm just using eyeshadow. But this also, since it is like slightly flat while also being fluffy, it can kind of help you get a little bit more precision than you would from, say, the brush that we used in the crease, because obviously that one is just straight up big. If you want like a gigantic under eye bag, then you of course can do this look. But since I like a little bit more precision, obviously I'm going to use the slightly smaller one and the slightly flatter one. Since we're doing the same thing that we did in the crease, I'm going to begin with mud once again, taking that all over this brush. And I'm kind of just beginning that as the transition shade. Obviously, like I said, I like to make it big, but this also allows for a little bit of leeway if you like to have, you know, a little bit more precise of a lower lash line. And also this will help kind of blend out and cover up our mistakes that we made when we were trying to get the black as close to the lash line as possible. I feel like these sort of looks are very much a trust the process kind of look, as one of my favorite YouTubers, Kitty Snack, would say, where it kind of just begins looking like a little bit of a mess, but as you go on, you can kind of see everything coming together. And of course, I like to blend that out to where I had originally put the shade when we're doing the crease into my outer corner. That way everything is nice and blended. Okay, and then obviously we're going to layer the black on top of that a bit closer to the lash line. So I like to use a brush that's kind of like these two. So this is from the e.l.f. Mint Melt collection. Obviously this is from the Melt and Beetlejuice collection. Just very dense and kind of shorter than the other brushes that we have used so far. That way you can get a more precise look. I like the Beetlejuice one just like slightly more because while this one kind of tapers out and gets a little bit fluffy, this one tapers inward so you can get a bit more precision. But since they're very dense, you can still get like the thick smokiness. I also find that thicker brushes help make it so that you don't have to do quite as much blending as you would normally have to do. So we're going back into Boot, people, and we're just taking that on kind of the very like top of it, the very top edge, and we're placing that closer to the lash line. Okay, and personally I think that since the brush was thick enough that it kind of blended, you know, a little bit on its own, you can go back and blend it a little bit more if you want to. I think this side is okay. This one I'm going to take a little bit of mud and blend out because I don't know why I noticed that there was like a weird like line, whereas this side I don't think needs it quite as much. Blend as you desire. I don't think that that one needs quite as much blending as say like the crease in the upper parts would. And then you can go without an inner corner highlight if you so desire. I personally like to add it because even though I don't highlight my brow bone, I do like to have like a little something going on. So I'm just going to use Fly from this palette, and I'm gonna put a little bit of that, just very lightly, on the inner corner, just to like make sure we only look so dead, am I right? Okay, so you can also leave it like that if you want to, but what I like to do to add a little bit of extra oomph, I like to take a gel liner or any sort of black liner. I personally prefer this Melt gel liner in Onyx, and I'm going to put that all over my waterline just so everything feels very cohesive and it just kind of adds a little bit of something extra to the look. So my preferred brush for this is the e.l.f. and Kissa J6, which is just this like straight up flat rectangular little brush. It just does the job. Here we go. I'm not going to talk while doing this. You can kind of see what's going on. And you can kind of see the difference between the two eyes. I don't think that this one looks bad. I just think that this adds a little extra something that I really like. So that's basically how I do this eye look. Obviously it took a while because I was explaining things, but I find that it's really easy and this is sort of my go-to look when I don't know what else to do with my face. So I'm just gonna add some mascara. You can add lashes if you want. I personally haven't worn false lashes in a very long time. I wanna try again sometime, but I don't think today's the day. So I'm gonna do my lashes, my face, my lips, all of that. Okay, y'all, so that is it for this video. I know it's super long and I've talked a whole lot, but this is one of my favorite looks to do, and I've done it so much with so many different products that I feel like I've kind of perfected it by now. And I have a lot to say about the technique and the products and everything that goes into it. So I hope that this was helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions, comments, concerns in the comments down below. I would love to hear from y'all as always. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more content from me. And I will see y'all in my next one. I hope y'all have a wonderful day. Bye!